Welcome to another episode of There's Nothing Artificial. I'm your host, Rich Hyman, and today I'm joined by a special guest, Clayton Pummel. Clayton and I have recently finished up a book on generative artificial intelligence, and we're here today to discuss the book. So, Clayton, you want to share a little bit about, how we met and maybe a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here. So I guess a little bit about myself first. So I've spent the last, call it 8 to 10 years, in one way or another at the intersection of law, data privacy, cybersecurity, and machine learning. And while I'm a licensed attorney, I've always tended to gravitate towards functions that support machine learning implementations in some way. I've been very fortunate in that I have worked on some very complex classified projects for some of the largest agencies in the world, all the way down to startups just trying to get new and emerging machine learning technologies off the ground. So it's really been a lot of fun. My functions on those teams have always been around data privacy and the security of the models themselves. However, there's been this emerging emphasis on the legal and regulatory landscape, which has been kind of crazy over the last couple of years, which is really where I think your and I's kind of origin story begins. But I recall working on a project and being frustrated at just a lot of the hype around technology and claims that were being made, and picked up your book, Doing AI, read it, thought it was fantastic. I think I described it as it took a pin and popped the balloon of the AI hype. So reached out, said hello, and here we are, 2 years later, with a book of our own. So it's been a crazy journey.
Yeah, it sure has. In fact, I went back into LinkedIn, which is how we originally met. You sent a cold email to me, and I think that was in early 2020. And I looked back on sort of the cadence, if you will, of the not only when we started to message each other, but also the frequency. It picked up over the summer, and then it really gained momentum when ChatGPT came out. And I think that's really when we started going back and forth on, particularly on the regulatory and the legal implications of what all of this was and what that meant, I think, or from those conversations, that was effectively the outline of the book.
It was. And do you remember who's to blame for all of this? It was you, because in one of your posts you said, "Hey, why don't we write a little paper about this?"
Yeah. That's definitely my fault. Yeah, it had legs though, and what started off as an article idea, I think I recognized, but I think it was sort of a joint acknowledgement that there was really a lot here, and so reflected, I think, in the fact that the article idea quickly ballooned to 6,000 or 7,000 words, and that was really scratching the surface. Interestingly, as an aside, I just posted this this idea onto LinkedIn just yesterday, which was this idea that the people who know the most, they're almost like these AI influencers. I'm sure you've seen it on social media, LinkedIn particularly, when they're all talking about artificial intelligence, ChatGPTs, oftentimes specifically. And even giving legal advice or the regulatory interpretation. And my comment was the people, and this I learned from working with you over the last few months, the people who know the most about the legal landscape are the ones who know enough not to give legal advice on LinkedIn. And so I guess there's sort of a cautionary tale there, or lesson of be skeptical, I guess, of what you read on LinkedIn, because, despite the fact that we pulled this together in only a few months, it's still about 25,000 words. And it's even in some senses kind of a superficial-ish treatment of it, which is there's probably still a lot more that we could tell about the story, but we wanted to get something out to readers, to enterprises today, rather than something perfect in a few months.
Yeah, no, that's a bunch of good points, right? And sort of unpacking those is, starting with the expertise component of it. I, for one, am certainly terrified of ever making a statement or a claim of being an expert in this field whatsoever, because if you go to sleep an expert, you're going to wake up not one, right? I mean, it really is one of these scenarios where stuff is moving so fast and it's so complex because you just have so many different variables, different people, different perspectives, jurisdictions, laws. So it's a crazy world out there, but it makes it fun, right? And it kind of does feel like this project, this book, we're kind of at its inception, right? That you and I have discussed. This is going to be an ongoing, living, breathing, artifact, if you will, that will keep ourselves updated on the latest trends, but also hopefully share out there with the public and others, and particularly with business owners and key stakeholders trying to unpack all this and take advantage of these technologies.
Yeah. Yes, really salient point. So in preparation for this conversation, you had one stipulation, which is don't ask me one question. And I think you kind of already hinted why you didn't want that question to be asked. And the question is, can you tell me about the state of like AI? What was the question specifically? Do you recall? I think I have it in my text.
I think it was, don't ask me to come on here and provide a current overview state of all the impending AI legislation
that's it.
That's out there.
Yeah. So why is that you've already kind of covered it, but why is that such a difficult question to answer?
Well, I think it's primarily that it's multi-jurisdictional, and then also, and this is a often overlooked aspect of this kind of legal environment that we're going through right now, and everything emerging with generative AI and then AI at large, is that the United States in particular is taking a position that we have existing laws on the books right now that implicate AI, and that you're not allowed to hide on some emerging technology if you violate those laws. So an example of that would be anti-discrimination laws. Just because we create a new technology and we've trained it on a bunch of data and it's a model and it's AI, that doesn't allow you to use that model to, engage in discriminatory practices, whether it's loans or hiring employees or whatnot. And so I think the FTC in particular has come out very strong. The FTC, of course, is the regulating agency that has kind of been rubber stamped to be the AI police here in the US. It looks like it's trending that way. But I think that's just one example as to why I find it so difficult, and frankly, maybe not even as valuable. I think the better approach is to take a risk-based approach to whatever you're doing, whatever you're thinking about doing, do a risk assessment on that, and then start to understand what laws and regulations you might be subject to.
Right. Yeah. I think that's such a good point. Most of this is situated, and I think when most people, and maybe this is true for organizations as well, think about technology, they really like the sort of like the universal statements that are like statements that could be made, or I guess, or even like knowledge that is universally applicable. And I think what a lot of organizations are going to have to sort of contend with is that a lot of this is going to be situated. It's going to be specific. Even the application of the technology, I think, is going to be most useful when it's specific to a particular problem, and they have specific data sets that they're going to use to fine-train these models. I think that the technology, like ChatGPT, for example, is just too general to be useful. But even like the risk that these models create for organizations, I think, is going to be specific to an organization in the sector. They're high risk sectors, of course. It's going to be particular, I guess, is what I'm saying, in the country that they're in the state, maybe even ultimately they're in. How true do you think that statement is, that a lot of this is going to be situated?
Oh, I think it's absolute, right? And I think in particular, and I think this is what we tried to do in the book, right, was we tried to sort of extrapolate up and look at common themes that will be helpful and would be helpful in your regulatory journey if you're thinking about, using and deploying these technologies. And something you and I kept coming back to, because we had essentially disclaimers in every paragraph that we kind of cleaned up, but it was, look, all of this is contingent on are dependent on your use case, your specific use case that is unique to you in territory and purpose and function and who it impacts and what your ultimate goals are. And so I think your statement is spot on in that it's just highly dependent and use case specific. All that being said, I think the recommendations that we make throughout the book are extremely valuable in two regards. One is just simply doing doing it responsibly, so that a lot of the dangers that these regulations are trying to head off and avoid, that you're already kind of guarded against those, which I think is good for your business. I think it's good business not to hurt or harm your employees, right? And I think understanding how these technologies work, which you do an excellent job laying out in the book, and then understanding the regulatory environment we're playing in are all important factors for that.
There's sort of in the book there are several lists with recommendations and suggestions that are very, I guess, atomistic. Like I think they're useful enough to be actionable, but there are also like these general frameworks where they're almost universal-ish enough to also be useful for anybody. And so we were, my experience, it sounds like perhaps your experience was similar in approaching the book, was kind of oscillating between these two scales, like general information that's generally useful, and then sort of these use cases or counterexamples that organizations should watch out for, and specific guidance on like situated deployments. But so a little bit of background for people that are listening in. The general framework of the book, maybe framework's the wrong word, but we broke it up into four kind of related concepts. One, focusing on the data that is used to train these algorithms. Two, the tendency of generative models to memorize the training data, which I think is something that's kind of misunderstood, even in machine learning circles for practitioners. Three is what's three? It's sort of like the vulnerability of these models to indirect and direct adversarial prompting, and how leaky they are, I guess, ultimately, for personal and sensitive information. And then there's the legal framework, but they all kind of fit together because generative models, I mean, they were trained on data that came from the internet. The internet, of course, wasn't built for training generative models. And so the internet has a bunch of like crazy data in it. Some of it's toxic and problematic. Some of it's personal and sensitive. There's obviously a whole mess of copyrighted materials. That's problematic in and of itself. But these models have a tendency to memorize some of these training data. And so that presents, I think, some ethical and legal concerns for organizations. I don't think any of that would be problematic, except for the fact that generative technology has a really unique kind of function, which is it's supposed to respond to user requests with information. And so by their nature, they're leaky. They're meant to be leaky, like they generate content for users, and having it trained on, problematic content and the tendency to memorize training data and the fact that it's supposed to give you all the stuff that you ask for leads to some really wonky, let's not call it wonky. I don't want to trivialize it, but really like ethical and legal considerations.
So that's, sorry to interrupt.
No. I was going to ask you to add anything, if I missed anything, what you thought perhaps.
No, I just had a question for you because I was thinking about this before we hopped on, and I don't know that I came to a good answer in my own head. But what is it about these generative models do you think have caused and led to this excitement and energy and really, gasoline behind the AI movement? It really seems like they're being used in some effective ways and valuable ways, but this has really kicked everything into hyperdrive. So what is it about these models? Why are they so great?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it comes from, I think it comes from a number of directions. I think the first, like when I wrote Doing AI, what I was responding to mainly was the hype associated with supervised machine learning and the fact that neural networks specifically became suddenly really good at classifying images. So it was really like the AlexNet moment in 2012 was a computer vision moment, and it was a kind of also a supervised machine learning moment as well, which is we could really map any input to any output. Like this, there was this magic function that sits between inputs and outputs that could do any sort of mapping, and really fit almost perfect functions to data, which is incredibly novel, especially looking at it in a historical context. However, I think what a lot of organizations quickly acknowledged was that they don't necessarily have computer vision problems. And second is that you could shift a lot of problems into supervised machine learning problems, but not enough, I think, to like really impact business. It impacted businesses. There's no question that supervised machine learning, even to this day, impacts businesses. But I don't think it was the same as like language is going to be a binding element for document generation, for image generation, for videos, for audios, and that figuring out how to generate language, I think has been transformative because language is just to me, it's just something general enough to fit into a lot of use cases. And there's no question that there's been novelty. In our book, I think we take certain care to not say, hey, this is all risk. It's just that organizations should put risk first when evaluating the application of these technologies.
That's it. I couldn't agree more. I think if there was one takeaway from the book, or at least change in behavior, it's that we need to think about these models, and maybe not the generative models per se, but just at large, as going, our performance needs to go way beyond some kind of an accuracy metric, right? And I think if we can start saying model success from the outset needs to include a whole host of things to ensure that they're not biased, to ensure we can explain them, to ensure humans know that they're interacting with the system if they are, that we're tracking them, that we're monitoring them, that they're not drifting and becoming something we never intended them to do, and that we can responsibly kind of wind them down when that time comes. I think, if we could just redefine what success looks like, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, in the book, actually, is I call a lot of machine learning research idiosyncratic, and in my mind, I wonder if we'll cut this actually. In my mind, idiosyncratic, like the root word idio, is like used to call people idiots too, right? Like this idea that things are idiosyncratic is really that a lot of concerns are. I'm almost sure we'll cut this. Dan, you could let me know. The idea of calling it idiosyncratic, however, is really like this idea that a lot of the concerns of machine learning research, and I'm not the first one to acknowledge this, I could find papers that made similar points going back 10 or 15 years, but the concerns are often very private, right? Like an idiot is somebody who doesn't understand like their public persona or their public role. And I think enterprises are going to have to wrestle with a lot of the machine learning research is really like these idiosyncratic concerns that are really almost singularly focused on performance. However, when taking that research out of academia and putting it into a public setting, organizations have to acknowledge the public role that these algorithms are going to play, that they're really going to play in the implementation of the technology. And so they can't be singularly focused on something as narrow as performance, because when you're focused on something like performance, well, it gives you an opportunity to disregard all other concerns and organizations. It's not like other people have made similar, I guess, assertions that, you need to look at more than performance. I guess what we're saying is that, yes, you need to look at more than performance, but the reason is because your concerns are now, if you deploy these technologies or adopt these technologies, your concerns have to be public oriented. And I think that's what I was really excited about this project, and why I wouldn't have done it without you, is because, making that technical argument, I don't think is as substantive as saying, okay, well, the public implications are really legal and ethical implications. And, your background, I think, bolstered that argument. That isn't just a technical argument. It's not just talking about idiots who are doing idiosyncratic research. It is, and it's not just about accuracy. It's something more. It's that, it is this like public concern that organizations, I think, need to embrace and really focus on data excellence. I don't know. I'm that's a little sprawling at the end, but hopefully the point is made. What do you think?
No, absolutely it is. And, I also am a little concerned. It seems to me, and I don't want to be a negative Nelly here, but there's all this focus on what may happen at some point in the future with AI. It may take over. It may start to kill us. It may do these things. And they're all very sensational and just bonkers to me, especially in light of the fact that there's real tangible harms that are actually happening right now from these technologies, right? I mean, whether it's bias, misinformation, privacy abuses, potentially trampling on copyright protections. I mean, there's just all of these issues. And to their credit, I think that's why these regulations are moving as fast as they are, proposed regulations. But to me, it seems that's where our focus should be, is how do we address the here and now? And then, it's not that these big philosophical conversations don't have a place. They absolutely do. And better to plan now than be sorry later. However, I don't want to overlook the here and now.
Yeah. And that's what the book focuses on, the here and now. In fact, I've pondered, I guess, similar things, which is, when most of the discussions happening today around so-called like AI alignment are around these, oftentimes they are around these like goofy ideas of superintelligence or, dystopian futures about paper clips or purgeability. But they're pretty abstract, and the grounding the whole conversation inside of a legal and regulatory framework. Not that we're advocating, or I don't think we're advocating for legal and regulatory enforcement. Some of those conversations, of course, are happening on platforms like LinkedIn. Some people are very upset, and maybe justifiably so. It's that, practically speaking, organizations are going to have to respond to the legal and regulatory.
That's it.
Yeah.
Could you explain to a business owner or to me when we say a model hallucinates, what does that mean?
Yeah, simply it just makes shit up. So the debate around the generative technology, especially or specifically language models, I think typically oscillates between these extremes. And on one side, you have people who are generally advocating for these models in a very heavy-handed way. And they're saying, they assiduously generalize from the training data and they create novelty. And I think in the opening of the book, two examples we provide. One is the example of a language model describing how to remove a peanut butter and jelly sandwich from a VCR in the style of the King James Bible, which I think is hilarious. But it shows like how clever these algorithms can be. And I think the other one is like a swagged out Pope Francis in a puffy jacket, which I think is also like, they're kind of trivial examples in one sense, But they went viral in the sense that they went viral, and they probably didn't, they're not going to generate money for businesses. But I think they are reflective of how novel these algorithms can be. And there are, we cite a number of studies that demonstrate that these models do some of that assiduous generalizing. They do create new morphological structures. They do create new things that didn't exist before. And then, of course, the other side of that debate, the other pole, is that they're stochastic parrots, that they just make stuff up. And it is true that there is a random element to it. We talk about the decoding schemas in the book of how these models do generate something like text, and there is an element of randomness there. And it is true that the models don't really understand ground truth or meaning or understanding in a human sense. So I guess what I'm saying is neither one of those are 100% true. The truth lies somewhere in the middle, is that these models are kind of random and they don't really create meaning or possess understanding. But they don't also assiduously generalize, despite creating novel morphological structures, for example. They do memorize the training data, and oftentimes they are just interpolating signals between training examples. And so that is a long-winded way, I guess, of saying the truth, like always, I guess, kind of lies in the middle. I think organizations need to be aware that these algorithms aren't humans. They don't create text like humans because they don't understand the world that we live in. But they are pretty clever, and they will do a good job at creating novelty. And ultimately, I think organizations are going to have to make the final determination of what value they create. In fact, I chatted with a friend this morning, CEO of a software company here in the Beltway, and he was giving me a couple of examples of ways that they have tested the technology. And the performance has been pretty good, but the cost also is really high. And so I made fun of them for making sort of this cost benefit analysis that they're going to kind of wait because it's AI and everybody should be spending as much money as they can on AI. But I say that jokingly, but that's, I think, what a lot of organizations are going to have to do. They're going to have to look at specific use cases and evaluate the performance of the model, weigh that against the cost, factor in the risk, and make their own decision. And that would be my advice, and not to listen to too much of the noise that's going on online.
Yeah, that is interesting. So you brought up investment, and then as it kind of relates to novelty, immediately what I think about, and I wasn't super aware of this until we got deep into this project. Maybe I didn't realize the implications, but this idea of I'm going to invest in this technology, it's going to create something extremely novel for my business. And now I have to wrestle with the idea of, can I protect it? Is that my thing? Is it my thing or is it not my thing? Because if I use a large model let's say I come up with a really cool idea, and we kind of talk about this in the book, and I come up with a great idea for my business. I use one of these models to write the code for it. It does it. It spits it out. This thing works. It's awesome. It's revolutionary. But under existing law, I may or may not be able to protect that. So that code. So it's not mine. In other words, you may be investing in these models that do really, really cool, novel things, but you need to do an analysis as to whether those things are yours and whether they need to be. And if so, there's certain steps you can take to try and, increase the likelihood that you will be able to protect those outputs, but it's not easy, and it's definitely not straightforward.
My thoughts are, first and foremost, thank you, Clayton. Really invigorating conversation. Despite spending nights and weekends collaborating with you on this document, it is fun to just talk about. It's almost like it's not therapy, but it's an opportunity to reflect and look back on the book. And I think it's certainly something to be proud of. For people that are interested in the book, there's no, at least today, we don't have a release date. It's going to come out sometime in July. And again, it's just it's a book that's meant to target a business audience, and And we are looking to just provide, I guess, like practical knowledge and sensible suggestions around the adoption and really the safe and secure adoption and deployment of generative technology.
Thank you so much for having me on. There's Nothing Artificial. Thank you for your leadership and really spearheading this effort. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but it's a very fair statement to say that you carried the water for us, and I learned a tremendous amount throughout this experience, both about the industry and the profession and the regulatory environment, but also just about the process of writing a book and how challenging it is and how much work goes into it. So thank you. I'm looking forward to the future, seeing where this project goes, and just grateful to be a part of it.
Fingers crossed. By the book comes out in July.